Look, I know what you're thinking. Another classic revenge story, right? But what if I told you that my revenge wasn't some dramatic, mustache-twirling plot? What if I told you my biggest acts of vengeance were simply excelling beyond anyone's wildest expectations and letting the sheer, unadulterated shock of my success crush the spirits of the people who worked so hard to crush mine? They called me a nerd, a geek, a loser. Every cruel epithet you can imagine was hurled my way. They didn't just dislike me. They seemed fueled by an obsessive need to break me. But I didn't break. Not completely, anyway. Instead, I channeled every ounce of that hurt, that humiliation, that righteous anger into something else entirely. Something bigger. Something better. And now, I'm standing atop a mountain they can only dream of climbing, looking down at them. Was I wrong? Was it wrong to derive such a profound sense of satisfaction from seeing them flinch at my accomplishments? Seeing them realize exactly who I had become? Tell me if you would have felt differently in my shoes, because I honestly don't know how else I was supposed to react. Let's rewind a bit. School was quite frankly a living hell. I was that kid, you know? The one always buried in a book, the one whose eyes lit up during science class, the one who genuinely enjoyed learning. To the cool kids, the popular crowd, this made me a target. I was the antithesis of everything they stood for. They valued popularity, athletic prowess, being effortlessly cool. I valued knowledge, intellectual exploration, and, well, not being shoved into lockers. Their ringleader was a guy named Chad, a stereotype come to life. Quarterback, handsome in a conventional way, and incredibly cruel. His sidekick, Tiffany, was equally vicious, always ready with a biting comment or a public humiliation. They made my life miserable. It wasn't just physical bullying, although that happened too. The constant sneers, the whispered insults, the feeling of being an outsider in my own school. It chipped away at my self-esteem, bit by painful bit. I remember the time they convinced everyone that I was secretly in love with Chad, spreading rumors, leaving fake notes in my locker. The laughter when I walked into the cafeteria. I can still hear it. The feeling of hot tears stinging my eyes, the desire to just disappear. That feeling never quite went away. But beneath the layers of insecurity, something else was brewing. A resolve. A quiet, burning fire. I wasn't going to let them win. I wasn't going to let their cruelty define me. It wasn't just the big moments, either. It was the daily grind of being invisible, until someone needed a punchline. I remember sitting in the back of the bus, trying to make myself as small as possible, while Chad and his friends would throw crumpled pieces of paper at the back of my head, laughing every time one got stuck in my hair. I remember the group projects where I did all the work while they spent the time mocking my glasses or the way I spoke, only to see them take the credit when the grades came out. My parents tried to help, telling me that these people wouldn't matter in a few years, but when you're 15, a few years feels like an eternity. I lived for the weekends when I could lock myself in my room and dive into coding forums. That was my true world. In that digital space, nobody cared what I looked like or how many friends I had in the real world. They only cared about the elegance of my code and the logic of my arguments. It was the only place I felt powerful, and I knew even then that this power was my ticket out of that miserable town. I spent countless nights teaching myself Python and Java, fueled by the caffeine of cheap sodas and the desperate need to prove everyone wrong. I wasn't just studying to get an A. I was studying to build a fortress that no bully could ever breach. Every line of code was a brick in that wall. I remember specifically one Tuesday night, my eyes blurry from staring at a CRT monitor, when I finally successfully compiled my first complex program. It was a simple database, but to me it was a masterpiece. I felt a rush of adrenaline that no high school party could ever provide. I was building things while they were destroying things. That realization changed everything. I stopped seeking their approval entirely. If Chad laughed at me in the hallway, I'd just think about the elegant recursion in my latest script. If Tiffany made a comment about my thrift store jeans, I'd remind myself that those jeans were comfortable for 18-hour coding marathons. I became a ghost in the halls of that school. A phantom who was already living in a future they couldn't even imagine. I recall one afternoon in the library when I was working on an advanced calculus problem. Chad walked by and slapped the book shut, sneering about how I was wasting my life. I didn't even flinch. I just opened the book back up and kept working. The look of confusion on his face was priceless. He wanted to hurt me, but he had lost the ability to even reach me. By the time senior year rolled around, the bullying had reached a fever pitch because they could sense I was checked out. They tried harder to get a reaction, but I had learned to wear a mask of total indifference. I would just look through them as if they were made of glass. It infuriated Chad. He once cornered me in the hallway and hissed that I'd always be a pathetic little project, and I remember just smiling, a real genuine smile, because I had already received my acceptance letter to a top-tier engineering school. He didn't know it yet, but I was already gone. I had also started a small side business, building websites for local businesses under a pseudonym. By the time I graduated, I had several $1,000s saved up, more than most of the popular kids had ever seen in one place. Graduation was a blur of faces I hoped never to see again. While everyone was crying and hugging, I was looking at the exit signs. I didn't want a yearbook signed with fake messages. I wanted my diploma and a one-way ticket to my future. So I worked harder. I studied longer. I poured my soul into computer science, finding a world where rules made sense, where logic reigned, where my intelligence wasn't a liability, but an asset. It was my escape, my sanctuary. While they were busy worrying about homecoming and who was dating whom, I was busy mastering algorithms and building websites. When graduation finally arrived, I felt a sense of liberation. I was leaving that toxic environment behind. I got into a prestigious university with a scholarship, ready to put that chapter of my life behind me. I honestly thought that would be it. I'd move on, become successful, and they would fade into the obscurity they so richly deserved. And for a while, it seemed like that's exactly what would happen. College was amazing. I found my people who actually valued intelligence and creativity. I excelled in my classes, did internships at top tech companies, and by the time I graduated, I had multiple job offers. I chose one, a fast-growing startup with a visionary leader. I was on my way. I was thriving. I was, by all conventional standards, successful. I worked my way up from a junior developer to a senior architect in record time. I was the person people came to when things broke, the one who could see the solution when everyone else saw a dead end. I loved the pressure. I loved the late nights in the office, surrounded by whiteboards covered in complex diagrams. It was a different kind of intensity than high school, but I was built for it. I remember one specific launch night where we stayed up for 36 hours straight to push a major update. When the code went live and the metrics started climbing, the feeling was better than any high school victory. I was part of something that was changing how people interacted with technology. I bought my first apartment in the city, a place with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the skyline. Every morning, I would look out at the world and think about how far I'd come from that cramped bus seat. I started investing, building a portfolio that would eventually give me a level of financial freedom I never dreamed of. I wasn't just making a living, I was making a statement. My life was full of travel, interesting people, and work that actually mattered. I visited Tokyo, London, and San Francisco, attending conferences where I was a featured speaker. I was no longer the girl in the back of the class. I was the expert people paid to hear. But then the high school reunion invitation arrived. It had been 10 years. 10 years since I walked out those doors, determined to never look back. My initial instinct was a resounding absolute no. Why would I put myself through that again? Why revisit the scene of so much pain? But then a little voice inside me whispered, "Show them. Show them how far you've come. Show them they didn't win." It wasn't a malicious voice, not really. It was a voice of defiance. A desire for closure, maybe. To finally, once and for all, rewrite the narrative of my high school years. I discussed it with my partner, Alex, who had heard all the stories. "If you're doing it for yourself," Alex said. "If you need this for you, then do it. But don't do it for them. Their opinions don't matter anymore." And Alex was right. Their opinions didn't matter. But the idea of seeing the look on their faces when I walked in, it was intoxicating. I spent weeks thinking about it. Was I being petty? Maybe. But was I also entitled to a victory lap? Absolutely. I remembered every accidental trip in the hallway, every joke at my expense. I wanted to see if they had changed, or if they were still trapped in that small-town bubble, clinging to the glory of their teenage years while I had conquered the world. I decided to go. Not as the wallflower they remembered, but as the strong, confident, successful woman I had become. I prepared, both mentally and visually. I bought an incredibly chic, tailored outfit. A sleek black jumpsuit that made me feel powerful. I got my hair and makeup done. I was going to be the absolute best version of myself. I even decided to drive my new luxury sedan, a car that costs more than most people's houses in that town. It wasn't about being flashy. It was about the tangible evidence of my effort. Walking into that gymnasium was surreal. It was almost exactly the same, yet entirely different. The banners, the logos, the familiar smell of floor wax and stale popcorn, all there. But the people, they were older, some weathered, some barely recognizable. And as I walked in, I felt all eyes on me. Some looked with genuine curiosity, others with vague recognition. And then I saw them. Chad and Tiffany. They were holding court, the center of a small circle, still trying to project that cool vibe, but it felt a little desperate now, a little sad. They looked at me, and I saw a flicker of confusion cross Chad's face. He didn't recognize me. Not at first. But Tiffany did. I saw her eyes widen, saw the smile falter. "Oh my God," she murmured, loud enough for me to hear. Is that her?" The circle went quiet. They were staring at me. Me, the nerd they used to torment. But now I was different. I stood taller. I held my head high. I carried an air of confidence that was undeniable. I mingled, catching up with old acquaintances who were genuinely happy to see me. I shared a little bit about my career, about the success of my startup, about the incredible projects I was working on. I was careful not to brag, but I didn't hold back either. I let the facts speak for themselves. And I could see the effect it was having. People were impressed. They were respectful. The dynamic had completely shifted. I saw the way people leaned in when I spoke, the way they asked for my business card, the way they looked at my watch or the cut of my clothes. It was a strange feeling, being the center of attention for all the right reasons. I heard whispers behind me about my title, about my salary, about the companies I had worked for. It was like a reversed version of high school. Then inevitably, I crossed paths with Chad. He was alone at the bar, nursing a drink. "So," he said, not meeting my eyes, "I hear you're doing well for yourself." It wasn't a compliment. It was almost an accusation. "Yeah, I am," I said, keeping my voice cool and even. "I'm the VP of engineering at a tech startup." He looked up then, and I saw it. The flicker of surprise, maybe even a tiny bit of intimidation. "VP of engineering, huh? Wow. Guess all that studying paid off." It was the closest he would ever come to an apology. I could feel the old anger bubbling up, but I pushed it down. I was beyond that. "It did," I said simply and walked away. The rest of the evening was a blur of conversations, compliments, and yes, a few awkward encounters. But overall, it was surprisingly empowering. I had faced my bullies, not with aggression but with my own success. I had shown them that their cruelty hadn't defined me, that I had thrived despite them. I even had a long conversation with one of the teachers who used to ignore the bullying. Seeing the look of genuine admiration in her eyes was a small, sweet victory. I realized that night that I didn't hate them anymore. I mostly just felt sorry for them. Most of them were still stuck in that town, doing the same things, talking about the same people. I was the one who had escaped. I was the one who had grown. I left that reunion feeling like I had finally closed a heavy door that had been ajar for a decade. So that's the situation I was in, and I had to make a choice. Facing the ghosts of my past like that, showing up as this totally transformed person, it was a calculated risk. Before I tell you what happened next, what I did that really sealed the deal and the reaction it got, I want you to pause right now and comment below what you would have done in my shoes. Would you have even gone to the reunion? And if you did, would you have tried to blend in? Or would you have walked in there ready to show them exactly what you've achieved, like I did? Tell me. I'm genuinely curious what you think is the right move here. Okay, so I did the reunion thing, right? Walked in like a boss, made my presence known, subtly flaunted my success. It was satisfying, don't get me wrong. But the real, sweet, unexpected twist came a few months after the reunion. My startup was doing phenomenally well. We were growing rapidly, and we were looking to expand our operations. This meant hiring a lot of new people, particularly on the operations and sales side. Now, as VP of engineering, I was mostly involved in the technical hiring, but I kept an eye on the overall recruitment process. One afternoon, our head of HR, Sarah, walked into my office. "Hey, I wanted to get your take on this candidate," she said, handing me a resume. "They have great experience in sales, but something about the cover letter seems a little off. Do you mind taking a look?" I glanced down at the resume, and my heart stopped. The name staring back at me was Chad. That Chad. The Chad who had made my high school years a misery. The Chad who had sneered at my successes and celebrated my failures. Now here he was applying for a job at my company. I stared at the name, feeling a complex wave of emotions wash over me. Surprise, definitely. A sense of poetic justice, absolutely. But also pity? He had fallen from grace, that was clear. The resume was okay, but it reflected a career that had stalled. He was bouncing from job to job, never quite finding his footing. And here I was, the nerd he had tormented, sitting in a position of power. I read the cover letter. It was desperate. It was full of platitudes about seeking new challenges and being a team player. But the underlying tone was one of someone who was struggling. Sarah was watching my expression. "You know him?" she asked, sensing my reaction. "Yes," I said carefully. "We went to high school together." I could have said more. I could have told her about the bullying, the cruelty, the pain. I could have easily tanked his application with a single word. He was difficult, I might have said. Not a good cultural fit. It would have been the truth, from my perspective. I thought about the many times he had made me cry in the privacy of my bedroom. I thought about the time he threw my backpack into the mud just for the fun of it. I had the power to end his career prospects at my firm with a simple nod. But then, another thought occurred to me. A more powerful thought. A more evolved thought. Why not bring him in? Why not see him in this environment? Not to mock him, not to demean him, but to witness firsthand the person I had become, in the very place where I wielded influence and respect. It was a bold move. A bit risky maybe, but I couldn't resist. I wanted to see if the humility he showed at the reunion was real, or if he was still the same person inside. "Actually," I said to Sarah, "I think we should bring him in for an interview. I'm curious, kropka." She looked surprised but nodded. "Okay, I'll set it up." The day of the interview arrived. I was nervous, I won't lie. Not nervous about facing him, but nervous about how I would handle it. Would I be petty? Would I let the past dictate my actions? I prepared for that interview like it was a multi-million-dollar merger. I reviewed his sales figures, I looked at his previous companies, and I prepared a list of questions that were designed to test his competence, not his character. I wanted to be above reproach. I wanted to ensure that if he didn't get the job, it was for a legitimate reason. I sat in my office, watching the clock tick down. I looked at the awards on my wall, the photos of me at international conferences, and I realized that I didn't need to prove anything to him anymore. I had already won. When Chad walked into the conference room, he looked different. He was older, obviously, but he also looked smaller. The cockiness, the arrogance, it was gone, replaced by a nervous energy. He didn't recognize me at first. I was sitting at the head of the table, flanked by two other team members. We began the interview, standard questions about his experience, his sales approach. He answered as best he could, but he was clearly uncomfortable. He was trying too hard. He was sweating. And then I decided to drop the bombshell. "So Chad," I said, keeping my voice perfectly calm, "it's been a while since high school." He froze. His eyes widened as he finally put it together. The confusion, then the dawning realization, then the utter, sheer shock. His face drained of color. He swallowed hard. "Yeah, it has," he managed to choke out. The room was silent. My colleagues looked back and forth between us, sensing a history they didn't understand. The rest of the interview was excruciating. For him, I could tell he was mortified. Every question I asked, every statement I made, Must have felt like a direct confrontation. I kept it professional though. I didn't mention the past. I didn't gloat. I simply conducted the interview, observing his reactions, his discomfort, his awkward attempts to redeem himself. The contrast was palpable. Here I was composed, confident, holding the keys to his potential employment. And there he was, struggling, exposed, a shadow of the person he used to be. At one point, he stumbled over a question about conflict resolution. I looked him dead in the eye and asked, "How would you handle a situation where a colleague feels targeted or marginalized?" The silence that followed was deafening. He knew I knew. I watched him sweat, watched him struggle to find words that wouldn't make him sound like a hypocrite. It was the most intense 10 seconds of my life. He eventually mumbled something about fostering a positive environment, but his voice lacked any conviction. After the interview, I met with the other team members to discuss. He seemed a bit rattled. One of them noted, "Yeah, he was a bit off." The other agreed. They didn't know the backstory, of course. For them, he was just another candidate. For me, he was a walking reminder of a painful past, now reduced to an applicant seeking my approval. We didn't end up hiring him. Not out of malice, but simply because he wasn't the strongest candidate for the position. There were others who were more qualified, more aligned with our company values. He lacked the specific technical sales background we needed for our niche market. He didn't have the vision or the drive that our startup required. I delivered the news myself, via a professional, courteous email. I didn't want him to feel any more humiliation than necessary. But I also knew that the damage was done. He had been forced to confront his past, to see the consequences of his actions, to realize just how much the world had changed, and how much I had changed. He replied with a very short, very polite, "Thank you for the opportunity." I never heard from him again. I sometimes wonder what he thought when he saw my name in the rejection email. Did he feel regret? Did he finally realize that the nerd he bullied was the person who could have changed his life? The aftermath was subtle, but profound. Word got around, as it often does. Tiffany found out. Other people from our high school found out. And the narrative changed. I wasn't the weird nerd who succeeded despite being bullied. I was the incredibly successful woman who was now, in a way, the master of her former tormentor's destiny. It wasn't a malicious kind of power. It was the power of transformation, of resilience, of simply being better. And seeing the shock, the realization, the quiet acknowledgement of my success in their eyes, that was the ultimate revenge. It wasn't about hurting them. It was about showing them that their attempts to diminish me had utterly, completely failed. It was about taking back my power, on my own terms. I realized that my success was the loudest thing in the room, louder than any insult they had ever thrown at me. I began to speak more openly about my journey, even giving a talk at a local high school about overcoming adversity. I shared my story not to shame my bullies, but to inspire the kids who were currently sitting where I used to sit. I told them that the people who try to pull you down are only doing so because they're already beneath you. I felt a weight lift off my shoulders that I didn't even know I was carrying. The closure didn't come from the reunion or the interview. It came from the realization that I was no longer defined by what they did to me. I was defined by what I did for myself. I started a scholarship program for students interested in STEM from underfunded schools, ensuring that other nerds would have a path to the same mountain I climbed. Every time I see a young girl's eyes light up when she solves a coding problem, I feel a sense of triumph that no bully could ever touch. I also started a mentorship program within my own company, specifically focusing on building a culture where everyone feels heard and respected. I made it my mission to ensure that no one in my professional life would ever feel the way I felt in high school. This proactive approach to kindness and inclusion became my new standard of excellence. I realized that true success isn't just about what you achieve for yourself, but what you build for others. I began to see my past as a catalyst for a more empathetic and effective leadership style. The pain I endured became the fuel for my passion for fair treatment and professional integrity. I've since been invited to speak at major industry events about corporate culture and ethical leadership. Each time I stand on a stage, I think about the girl on the bus and how proud she would be of the woman I've become. My story isn't just about getting back at people. It's about moving forward so fast that they're just a blur in the rearview mirror. I've found a peace that I never thought possible. I no longer check the social media of the people who hurt me. I no longer wonder what they're doing or if they're sorry. I'm too busy living my life, pursuing my goals, and surrounding myself with people who challenge and support me. So look at me now. I'm standing on top of my own mountain, and it's a view they can't even fathom. They might have made my life miserable back then, but they also inadvertently forged me into someone incredibly strong, incredibly determined, and incredibly successful. My revenge wasn't about tearing them down. It was about building myself up so high that their pettiness couldn't even reach me. It was about proving once and for all that intelligence, hard work, and kindness can, and often do, triumph over cruelty. It took a long time to get here, a lot of pain and hard work, but I wouldn't change a single moment of it. Because that journey, with all its challenges, led me right here, to this place of peace and accomplishment. And that, my friends, is the best kind of revenge there is. The silence of their defeat is more satisfying than any argument I could have ever had with them. I have built a life that is beautiful, meaningful, and entirely mine. I've learned that the best response to negativity is overwhelming positivity and success. I've learned that your scars are just proof that you survived and grew stronger. And that's my story. It's a journey that started with pain and humiliation, and ended with success, resilience, and a quiet sense of triumph. I really hope my experience resonates with anyone out there who feels like they're being held back, like their uniqueness is a flaw rather than a strength. Don't ever let anyone tell you who you are or what you can achieve. You are the architect of your own destiny, and the tools you use, your mind, your heart, your ambition, are far more powerful than any weapon a bully can wield. Remember that your value isn't determined by the opinions of people who don't understand your potential. Keep your head down, do the work, and one day, you'll look back and realize that the people who tried to break you were actually just part of the scenery on your way to something much greater. Don't waste your energy on hate. Use it as fuel for your dreams. Your future is a blank canvas, and you're the one holding the brush. Paint something magnificent. Like this video if you were on my side and think that sometimes, success is the absolute best form of revenge. Subscribe for more stories like this one. And share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section. Do you think I handled it right? Did Chad get what he deserved? I really want to hear your perspective. I'll see you all in the next story.